You may wear our family name, but you will never carry our blood.
You taught me that loyalty makes a family, not blood. Today, I'm simply following your lesson.
You must understand our ways. Do not forget your place.
The Korean Mafia boss's family hated his black wife. She became their only hope. Her mother-in-law once told her that money can buy a wedding dress, but never a bloodline, and Amara had smiled, sipped her tea, and thought, quietly, that bloodlines had never once wired a payment through 6 shell companies to save anyone's empire. Some things only intelligence can buy. Hit like, share this, and subscribe before the Kang family's secrets bury them alive. Only people siding with liars, backstabbers, and cold-blooded betrayal skip this. If you believe loyalty should be earned, not inherited by blood, prove it. Subscribe now because Amara certainly isn't backing down. The mansion smelled like jasmine and judgment, which Amara had decided years ago was the Kang family's signature scent. She stood in the marble foyer on the morning of her first wedding anniversary, holding a bouquet nobody had asked her to hold, listening to grandmother Kang narrate her existence to a room of relatives as though Amara were a museum exhibit with poor provenance. She does not even speak Korean, grandmother Kang announced, loud enough to be heard in the kitchen, the garden, and possibly Busan. Jaehoon could have married a Kwon or a Yoon. Instead, he brings home a stranger from Lagos and calls it love. Amara had heard worse. She had once been called a diversity hire by a man she later helped send to federal prison, so family gossip barely registered on her personal scale of insults. Still, she allowed herself one small private thought. If love were a crime, this family would already have convicted her without a trial, a jury, or a single fact. Jaehoon Kang entered the room the way he entered every room, like whether nobody had been warned about. Tall, precise, dressed in the kind of tailored black suit that made lesser men look like they were attending their own funeral, he crossed to Amara and kissed her hand in front of his entire disapproving family, a small act of devotion that made 3 cousins visibly wince. Careful, Amara murmured. Your grandmother might faint. She has survived worse, Jaehoon said. She survived my father's temper and 2 recessions. She will survive love. It was easy, in that quiet joke, to forget what Jaehoon actually was. Not a businessman in the ordinary sense, though the paperwork said otherwise. Jaehoon Kang controlled shipping routes, real estate, and a network of quiet men who solved loud problems, and he had built it all on the same principle his grandmother lived by, that loyalty mattered more than blood. Even when he pretended otherwise for her sake, Amara had known exactly what she was marrying. She had spent a decade as a financial crimes investigator, chasing dirty money across borders the way bloodhounds chase anything that smells like a lie, and she had read Jaehoon's entire file before their second date. Offshore accounts, 2 indictments that mysteriously evaporated, a reputation for mercy that only extended to people who had never betrayed him. None of it scared her. What scared her, if she allowed herself honesty, was this dining table, where every glance from his relatives felt like a credit check she was destined to fail no matter how good her numbers actually were. She did not fight them. She had learned long ago that arguing with people who had already reached a verdict was like playing chess against someone convinced the board was decorative. So she smiled.
She poured tea.
She noted, quietly, who flinched every time she mentioned audits, and filed it away the way she filed everything, patiently, permanently for later. That evening, while caterers dismantled the anniversary decorations and grandmother Kang retired upstairs still muttering about tourists, Jaehoon's phone rang in a way phones only ring when something has gone catastrophically wrong. Amara watched her husband's face change in real time, the easy weather turning to storm, and felt the particular cold clarity she used to feel right before uncovering a case that would ruin someone's entire life. What happened? She asked, already reaching for her laptop instead of her wine glass. The accounts, Jaehoon said, staring at his screen like it had personally betrayed him. All of them. Frozen. Emptied. Gone. Somewhere upstairs, grandmother Kang was still congratulating herself on correctly identifying Amara as a threat to the family. She had simply aimed the accusation at the wrong woman entirely. Amara opened her laptop. cracked her knuckles, and felt something settle into place inside her chest, calm, sharp, and almost eager. The tourist, it turned out, was about to become the only person in that mansion who knew exactly how to fight a war that didn't involve raised voices or old money. She just hoped the family would still respect her once they realized how good she actually was at this. Detective work, it turned out, looked nothing like the movies. There was no dramatic montage, no neon whiteboard covered in red string. There was Amara, barefoot on cold marble at 2 a.m, 3 laptops open, a cup of cold tea she kept forgetting to drink, and the low hum of a household pretending it wasn't falling apart. Jehun paced behind her like a man who had spent his entire adult life solving problems with money or muscle and had just discovered neither currency worked here. "Tell me something," he said. "Anything." "I can tell you that whoever did this wasn't clumsy," Amara said, eyes still on the screen. "Clumsy people leave fingerprints. This person left a signature. Practically autographed it. Meaning they wanted to be found eventually. Just not yet." She scrolled through a wall of transaction logs, the kind of financial wreckage most people would find incomprehensible and Amara found almost soothing, like reading a familiar language after years abroad. This wasn't a rival syndicate hacking in from outside. Whoever did this had access. Real access. The kind you only get from inside this house. The silence that followed had weight to it. Jehun stopped pacing. By morning, the mansion had transformed from a place of quiet judgment into a war room disguised as a breakfast table. Grandmother Kang sat at the head, spine straight, face unreadable, while relatives whispered theories that ranged from rival gangs to curses to, inevitably, Amara herself. "Perhaps," Cousin Youngho said, not quite looking at her. "The timing is interesting. Money disappears right after the wedding anniversary." Amara did not raise her voice. She simply set down her cup with the precision of a woman who had spent a career staying calm while liars panicked around her. "If I wanted to steal from this family, Youngho, I wouldn't have waited a year and thrown a party first. I'd have taken it on day one and been sipping something tropical by now." A few relatives almost smiled. Grandmother Kang did not, but something in her eyes shifted, some old certainty developing its first hairline crack. "She stays," Jehun said, in the tone of a man who had made exactly one demand his entire marriage and intended it to be final. "She's the only one in this house who actually understands what's happening to us." Grandmother Kang studied Amara for a long moment, the kind of look that used to make Amara's stomach tighten and now, oddly, did not. "Fine," the old woman said. "Find who did this. Prove you belong at this table, tourist. Or prove them right." It should have felt like an insult. Instead, it felt like a contract, clear terms, clear stakes, exactly the kind of arrangement Amara had built her old career around. She got to work. By the second day, patterns started emerging the way patterns always did once you stopped looking for monsters and started looking for math. The stolen funds hadn't vanished into some distant rival's account. They had moved through a maze of shell companies, yes, layered and disguised, yes, but the initial authorization had come from inside the house, from a device connected to the mansion's private network, at a time when most of the staff were asleep and most of the family was pretending to be. Amara narrowed the window, then narrowed it again, then found something that made her sit back slowly in her chair, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm decides where to land. "Jehun," she said quietly. He crossed the room in 3 steps.
What?
"The access point," Amara said, turning the laptop toward him. "It's not external. It's Taeyang's login. Jehun's younger cousin. The one who brought Amara coffee unprompted during family gatherings. The one who defended her, gently, whenever the others got too sharp. The one everyone assumed was the family's soft, harmless heart." Jehun stared at the screen like it had personally reached out and struck him. "That's impossible." "I know," Amara said. "That's usually how it works. The people closest to us are the ones we never think to check." Downstairs, oblivious, Taeyong laughed at something one of the cousins said, his voice easy, warm, utterly unbothered. A man who believed his secret was still safely buried beneath layers of code and family trust. Amara closed the laptop slowly. Somewhere in that house, A war was about to start that had nothing to do with rival gangs or old money, and everything to do with betrayal wearing the most familiar face imaginable. And for the first time since she'd walked through those marble doors as a stranger, Amara understood exactly why fate had put a financial crimes investigator in this family. They just didn't know it yet. The confrontation almost happened over breakfast, which felt appropriately absurd to Amara. The idea that a criminal empire might unravel between scrambled eggs and orange juice. But she stopped Jahun with a single hand on his arm before he could stand up and turn a dining room into a crime scene. "Not yet," she whispered. "If we move too fast, he'll bolt. Or worse, he'll have backup we don't know about. Let me finish tracing this properly. Give me one more day." Jahun's jaw tightened in a way that made three relatives suddenly find their toast fascinating. "One day," he agreed.
For you.
Not for him. Taeyong, sitting 3 seats down, buttering bread with the relaxed hands of a man who genuinely believed he'd gotten away with something, glanced up and smiled at Amara like they were old friends. "You look tired," he said. "Working too hard trying to save us, tourist?" The nickname had lost its sting weeks ago, but hearing it now from him felt different. Sharper. Almost funny in the way betrayal often is right before it stops being funny at all. "Someone has to," Amara said sweetly, and went back to her tea. That night, she worked faster than she had in years, cross-referencing offshore transfers with old case files from her investigator days, connecting dots that formed a picture uglier than she expected. Taeyong hadn't acted alone, and he hadn't acted out of greed exactly. He'd acted out of a decade of quiet resentment, watching cousins and uncles inherit respect he felt he'd earned twice over and received half of. A rival organization had noticed that resentment the way sharks notice blood and offered him something the Kang family never had, the feeling of being someone's first choice instead of their backup plan. It was almost sad. Almost. By dawn, Amara had built an evidence trail so complete it practically told its own story: timestamps, login records, encrypted messages between Taeyong and a contact known only as Director Yoon, a name that made Jahun's face go pale and furious in equal measure when she showed him. "He's been talking to Yoon for 8 months, Jahun said, voice low, dangerous. "Yoon killed my uncle." "Then let's make sure this ends differently," Amara said. They gathered the family in the main hall that afternoon, the same hall where grandmother Kang had once introduced Amara like a disappointing acquisition. This time, Amara stood at the center of the room, laptop open, evidence displayed on the mansion's main screen for everyone to see, while Taeyong's easy smile slowly cracked under the weight of numbers that didn't lie the way people did. "You're wrong," he said first, predictably. Then, when the timestamps proved otherwise, "You don't understand what it's like being invisible in this family." Then, finally, stripped of every excuse, just anger. "I deserved more than scraps. I gave you information because this family never once looked at me and saw anything worth respecting." The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent right before someone's entire identity collapses in public. Grandmother Kang rose slowly from her chair, older suddenly, smaller, staring at the great nephew she had spoiled since childhood like she was seeing a stranger wearing his face. "You nearly destroyed everything," she said quietly. "Not because you were desperate. Because you were proud." Taeyong had no answer for that. Pride rarely does. Security removed him within the hour, and the mansion that had spent months treating Amara like an unwelcome guest suddenly felt several degrees colder without its favorite son, and several degrees warmer toward the woman who had exposed him. Grandmother Kang found Amara alone later that evening, standing on the balcony overlooking gardens that had never once felt like they belonged to her. The old woman didn't apologize, not exactly. That wasn't her language. Instead, she stood beside Amara in silence for a long moment before speaking. "I called you a tourist," she said finally, "because I believed you would leave the moment things became difficult. I was wrong. You stayed when it would have been easier not to." "I don't leave what's mine," Amara said simply. "Even when it doesn't make it easy for me." Something shifted in the old woman's expression, not warmth exactly, but the beginning of it, the first thaw after a very long winter. Downstairs, Jehun watched his wife and his grandmother stand together for the first time without hostility between them and felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't realized had been clenched since his wedding day. The empire was safe. The traitor was gone. And the woman his family had spent a year underestimating had just quietly, permanently, rewritten her place at that table. But peace, Amara knew from experience, rarely stayed peaceful for long. Somewhere out there, Director Yoon had just lost his inside man, and men like that did not simply accept defeat and move on. Peace lasted exactly 9 days, which Amara privately considered generous by criminal underworld standards. It started with flowers. Not romantic ones, not the kind Jehun occasionally sent to apologize for missing dinner because someone's warehouse had mysteriously caught fire. These arrived with no card, no return address, just a single black orchid resting on top, delivered directly to the mansion's private wing where deliveries were never supposed to reach without 3 layers of security clearance. Amara turned the box over in her hands at the kitchen counter, studying it the way she used to study evidence bags. "Someone wants us to know they can get close," she said. "This isn't a threat. It's a business card." Jehun's expression darkened. "Yoon." "Probably," Amara agreed. "Men like that don't send warnings unless they're confident. Confidence is useful information. It tells us he still thinks he has the upper hand." "Does he?" Amara considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything, without ego or panic. "Not if we're smart. He lost his inside source. Whatever he's planning now, he's improvising. Improvising men make mistakes." Grandmother Kang, listening from the doorway with the sharp stillness of a woman twice her age pretending she wasn't eavesdropping, finally stepped into the kitchen. Something had changed in how she looked at Amara since Taeyang's fall, a wary respect replacing months of open suspicion. "What do you need?" the old woman asked. "To end this properly?" Amara blinked, genuinely surprised. It was the first time anyone in that family had asked what she needed instead of what she was hiding. "Access," Amara said. "Real access. Not the polite kind you give guests, the kind you give family." Grandmother Kang's jaw tightened, old pride warring with new necessity, and then, slowly, she nodded. "You'll have it." Here's a question worth sitting with while this story unfolds, because every family eventually faces it. When someone spends years treating you like an outsider and then needs you to save them anyway, do you help because it's right or walk away because you finally can? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because Amara's choice is about to get a lot more complicated. With real access came real danger. Amara spent the next 2 days buried in Director Yoon's financial footprint, and what she found chilled her in a way Taeyang's betrayal never had. Yoon wasn't just competing with the Kang family for territory. He was quietly acquiring debt across 3 continents, buying up every creditor who had ever loaned Jehun's businesses money, positioning himself to collapse the empire legally, financially, without ever needing to fire a single shot. "He's not planning an attack," Amara told Jehun, spreading documents across the war room table that used to be a dining room. "He's planning a hostile takeover. If he calls in these debts simultaneously, you lose everything within a week. No violence required. Just paperwork." Jehun stared at the numbers like they were a language designed specifically to humiliate him. "I don't know how to fight this kind of war." "I do," Amara said quietly. "This is exactly the kind of war I used to fight." It took every ounce of skill she had built across a decade of chasing dirty money to construct the counter, restructuring debt through legitimate channels faster than Yoon could consolidate it, exposing 2 of his shell companies to regulators who had been hunting them for years without success, turning his own patience against him. She worked 18-hour days fueled by tea and stubbornness, while Jehun ran interference with the family, and Grandmother Kang, astonishingly, ran interference with everyone else. On the 5th day, Amara found the crack she needed, a single overextended shell company Yoon had used to fund the whole operation, vulnerable, exposed, one legal filing away from collapse. "If we move now," she told Jehun, "we don't just survive him. We end him." Jehun studied his wife across the table, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back messily, laptop glowing against her face, and felt something that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with awe. "You're terrifying," he said. "Thank you," Amara said, already typing. "Took you long enough to notice." Somewhere across the ocean, Director Yoon was about to discover that the family he'd underestimated had quietly armed themselves with the one weapon he never accounted for, a woman his intelligence reports had dismissed in a single dismissive line as merely the boss's wife. He was about to learn, expensively, exactly how wrong that assessment had been. The filing went through at 6:03 in the morning, Seoul time, which meant it hit at exactly the moment Yoon's team would be arriving at their offices with coffee in hand and absolutely no idea their entire funding structure was about to evaporate before lunch. Amara watched the confirmation load on her screen with the same quiet satisfaction she used to feel watching handcuffs close around men who thought money made them untouchable.
"It's done," she said.
His shell company just got flagged by regulators in 2 countries simultaneously. He can't consolidate debt from an entity that's currently being investigated for fraud. Jae-hoon exhaled like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying since childhood. Just like that. Never just like that, Amara corrected. That took a decade of experience, 5 sleepless days, and an embarrassing amount of tea.
But yes.
Just like that. Grandmother Kang entered the war room carrying an actual pot of tea, which Amara had come to understand was the older woman's version of a white flag, a peace offering disguised as hospitality. She poured a cup and set it in front of Amara without a word, an act that would have seemed small to anyone outside this family and monumental to everyone inside it. "He will not accept defeat quietly," Grandmother Kang said. "Men like Yoon do not lose gracefully." She was right, of course. 2 days later, Yoon made his final move, not through paperwork or shell companies, but through something far more primitive. A car forced Jae-hoon's off the road outside the city. No injuries, thankfully, but the message was unmistakable. If he couldn't dismantle the empire legally, he'd try to dismantle its heart directly. Amara heard about the accident from a phone call that made her blood run cold in a way spreadsheets never could. She was at Jae-hoon's hospital bedside within the hour, checking him for injuries with the same intensity she usually reserved for checking financial statements, refusing to let go of his hand even after doctors confirmed he was fine, just bruised, just lucky. "I'm okay," Jae-hoon said gently. "You're okay this time," Amara said, voice tight. "Yoon doesn't stop because he lost money. He stops because he loses the will to keep losing. We need to make sure this ends now." For the first time since Amara had married into this family, she saw something new in Jae-hoon's eyes, not the calm authority of a boss who controlled every room he entered, but the raw fear of a man who had almost lost everything and finally understood, viscerally, why his wife fought so hard to protect what mattered. "Tell me what you need," he said. "I need Yoon exposed publicly," Amara said. "Not just financially ruined, discredited completely, so no rival, no ally, no future partner ever trusts him again. Men like that only truly lose when their reputation dies before they do." It took one more week, careful, precise, methodical, Amara feeding evidence to journalists who had spent years trying and failing to catch Yoon in the act, evidence too clean, too complete, too damning to ignore. Within days, headlines broke across financial networks exposing Yoon's fraud, his shell companies, his illegal debt acquisition scheme, unraveling a reputation he'd spent decades building. Yoon didn't call.
He didn't retaliate.
Men who lose their reputation in this world usually go quiet, because reputation was the only currency that mattered, and his had just been publicly, permanently bankrupted. The mansion exhaled for the first time in weeks. Grandmother Kang found Amara in the garden that evening, sitting alone beneath the same jasmine trees that had once made Amara feel like an unwelcome guest and now simply smelled like home. "You saved this family twice," the old woman said, sitting beside her with the careful dignity of someone unused to admitting fault. "I owe you an apology I should have given a year ago." "You don't owe me anything," Amara said honestly. "You owe yourselves the lesson. Loyalty isn't inherited. It's earned, every single day, by everyone at that table, including me." Grandmother Kang studied her for a long moment, then, unexpectedly, reached over and took Amara's hand, an act so foreign to her nature that even the garden seemed to hold its breath. "Welcome to the family," she said finally. Truly this time. Somewhere inside the mansion, Jehun watched his wife and his grandmother sit together in comfortable silence and understood that whatever empire he'd built with money and fear, the one Amara had just built with patience and truth would outlast all of it. 6 months passed the way healing usually does, quietly, unevenly, marked less by grand gestures and more by small shifts nobody announced out loud. Grandmother Kang started requesting Amara's opinion on business matters instead of merely tolerating her presence at the table. Cousins who once whispered about gold diggers now asked her, sheepishly, for advice on their own finances, which Amara found darkly hilarious in a way she kept mostly to herself. The empire, rebuilt on cleaner foundations than it had ever stood on before, hummed along with a stability Jehun hadn't known since before his father's death. For the first time in years, he slept through the night without one eye on his phone, waiting for disaster. Disaster, of course, rarely respects a peaceful streak. It arrived not as an attack this time, but as an invitation, gold-embossed, hand-delivered, requesting the presence of Jehun Kang and his wife at a gala hosted by the very financial council that had spent years quietly doubting whether the Kang family's fortune could survive another scandal. It was, Amara understood immediately, a test disguised as a celebration, an opportunity for old money to look the new, scandal-surviving Kang empire up and down and decide, publicly, whether they still belonged among the city's elite. "They want to see if we crumble," Jehun said, turning the invitation over in his hands like it might bite him. "They want to see if I crumble," Amara corrected. "Let's disappoint them." The gala was, predictably, a masterclass in polite cruelty. Amara felt it the moment she walked in, wearing a deep emerald gown that fit like armor, felt the eyes assessing her, cataloging her, waiting for a single misstep that would confirm every quiet rumor about the outsider who married into chaos. She smiled through it, danced through it, discussed offshore tax law with a room full of men who assumed she wouldn't understand a word of it, and left each conversation looking faintly rattled by how thoroughly she did. It was near the dessert course that the real test arrived, in the shape of a woman named Director Han, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of old money aristocrat who wielded politeness like a scalpel. "I must say," Director Han said, swirling wine she had no intention of finishing, "it's remarkable how quickly the Kang family recovered from their little troubles this year. Almost suspicious, some might say." The table went quiet in the particular way tables go quiet right before someone gets publicly dismantled. "Suspicious," Amara repeated pleasantly, "is an interesting word for surviving a coordinated financial attack, exposing the men responsible, and rebuilding without losing a single legitimate employee's job. I'd have chosen the word impressive, but I understand not everyone has the vocabulary for it." Someone at the far end of the table choked audibly on their champagne. Grandmother Kang, seated beside Amara for the first time at an event like this, allowed herself the smallest, sharpest smile of the evening. Director Han's composure flickered, just slightly. "You certainly speak boldly for someone so new to this world." "I'm not new to this world," Amara said, voice calm, unhurried. "I spent a decade taking down men exactly like the ones who attacked this family. I simply changed which side of the table I sit on. I'd be careful assuming that makes me less dangerous, not more." The silence that followed had a different texture entirely, less judgment now, more recalculation, the sound of an entire room quietly rewriting its assumptions. Jehun reached over and took Amara's hand beneath the table, a small private gesture that said more than any speech could have. Grandmother Kang lifted her wine glass just slightly toward Amara, a gesture so subtle most of the room missed it entirely, but Amara caught it and felt something settle permanently into place in her chest. By the end of the night, the gala's whispered verdict had shifted entirely. The outsider who married chaos had become the woman who outmaneuvered a criminal mastermind, faced down old money without blinking, and rebuilt an empire from the inside out. Invitations that had once been reluctant now came eagerly. Doors that had once stayed shut swung open without hesitation. Driving home, Jehun watched his wife lean her head back against the seat, exhausted, triumphant, utterly unbothered by a room full of people who had spent the evening trying and failing to intimidate her. "You didn't have to destroy Director Han quite that thoroughly," he said, amused. "Yes, I did," Amara said, eyes closed, smiling faintly. Some lessons only stick when they're humiliating. Somewhere behind them, the city lights blurred into gold, and Amara understood, finally, completely, that she hadn't just survived marrying into this family. She had rewritten its entire story, one careful, ruthless truth at a time. 2 years later, the mansion smelled different. Still jasmine, still old wood polished by decades of careful hands, but underneath it now, faintly, permanently, something that hadn't existed when Amara first walked through those doors as a stranger nobody had voted for. It smelled like home, hers, earned, undeniable. The occasion was Grandmother Kang's 80th birthday, and the same dining hall that once hosted whispered insults about tourists and gold diggers now overflowed with something the family had never quite managed before Amara arrived: unguarded laughter. "You realize," Jahun said, watching his wife direct caterers with the same calm precision she once used to dismantle international fraud schemes, "you basically run this family now." "I always ran this family," Amara said, not looking up from the seating chart. "I just used to do it quietly." He laughed, and it struck her, watching him across the room surrounded by cousins who once mocked her and now fought for her attention, how far they'd traveled from that first anniversary when she'd stood holding an unwanted bouquet, like evidence at her own trial. Taeyang's name still surfaced occasionally, a cautionary tale muttered at family gatherings, a reminder of what pride left unchecked could cost. Director Yoon's had faded almost entirely, swallowed by irrelevance, the particular quiet erasure reserved for men who mistake cruelty for power and discover, too late, that reputation is the only currency that never gets refunded. Grandmother Kang found Amara near the garden doors as the party reached its warm, noisy peak, moving slower now, leaning slightly on a cane she pretended she didn't need, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Do you remember," the old woman asked, "what I called you, the first time you stood in this house?" "Tourist," Amara said. "I remember. I was wrong," Grandmother Kang said simply, no dramatics, no flourish, just the plain honesty of someone who had learned, expensively, exactly how wrong. "Tourists visit. You built something here nobody else in this family had the courage to build. Truth, in a house that survived for generations on secrets." Amara felt something tighten pleasantly in her chest, an old wound finally, fully closed. "It only worked because you were brave enough to ask for help when it mattered. Not every family would have swallowed their pride like that." "Pride nearly destroyed us once already," Grandmother Kang said, glancing toward the spot where Taeyang used to stand every gathering, laughing too easily, hiding too well. "I learned that lesson at a cost I don't intend to pay twice." Later that night, after guests had gone, after Grandmother Kang had been walked carefully to bed by cousins who now competed for the honor, Amara stood on the same balcony where the old woman had once offered her first real apology, looking out over gardens that finally, completely, felt like hers. Jahun joined her quietly, wrapping his arms around her from behind, chin resting against her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked, "marrying into all this chaos?" Amara considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. The insults, the betrayal, the frozen accounts, and the black orchid and Director Han's poison pleasantries at that gala designed to break her. All of it had tried, in its own particular way, to convince her she didn't belong. All of it had failed. "No regrets," she said finally. "Just a very long, very expensive lesson for everyone who underestimated me." "They won't make that mistake again," Jahun said. "No," Amara agreed, smiling into the dark. "They won't." Below them, the mansion settled into the particular stillness of a house finally, truly at peace, no hidden ledgers, no whispered contempt, no ghosts of old prejudice lurking behind polite smiles. Just a family that had nearly destroyed itself through pride and blindness, saved by the one woman it had spent a year insisting didn't belong. The woman they once called a tourist had become the reason the Kang name still meant something at all. Not because she'd been born into their world, but because when everything collapsed and every door closed, she'd chosen again and again to stay, to fight, to prove that true strength was never measured by where you came from, only by what you refused to abandon when everyone else gave up. And in the end, that was a lesson no bloodline could have taught them nearly as well as she had.
The end.